My second home.
Community.
Sorority. Enigmatic.
Awesome.
Liberating.
Unforgettable.
Inspiring.
Friendly.
Ambition.
Prosperous.
Light.
Family.
Sisterhood.
Outside Sidgwick where the pond is, because you can literally look across the whole garden up until Peel and Clough.
The Peel swing. I've had some cries and I've had some really great laughs and memories with people.
The architecture, obsessed with the windows, like the big round windows.
It would be the corridor and particularly the wallpaper and the sound of footsteps going along as they change.
Like the courtyard that's just behind the Porter's Lodge. I think it's called the Mathematical Courtyard. Nobody knows you're there, but you can see everyone coming and going.
The College Hall. The ceiling is like a wedding cake.
And I have a little rose bush right outside my window.
The book club in its entirety. You can come here very quiet, very shy, and you just grow and grow and grow and you're fearless.
The view from my room, so I've got a bay window that looks out over the monument, and then it's really nice because I can always sort of see the sunset every evening.
Like so different to everything that it had been in the centre of town with like the heat and the number of people and the tourists, and I was just like, yeah, no, this is nice. This is where I want to be.
My favourite thing about Newnham is the library.
The old part of the library, up the top floor, the big window that looks over the Sidgwick site.
The Fifer Gates. It was my first memory of Newnham because my elder sister was a historian at Newnham and she had a room above the Fifer Arch.
The time of daffodils. The daffodils out by the old labs are the best in Cambridge.
When it's snowing. There's something very good about the white snow and the red brick.
The sun is shining.
Sunny and everyone's out on the lawns.
No matter what the season is, the gardening department does such a good job.
Newnham is at its best when it's really proud of its history.
Empowering young women.
Celebrating self and its people.
Students and staff and academics working together.
Buzzing. Which hopefully we'll see again very soon.
People make Newnham.
Staff to the fellows, to the DOSs, to the students.
I mean, the caterer team is always willing to go the extra mile to please students, to make sure that people feel very welcome.
I don't think in any other college I can just walk around and smile at strangers and receive a smile back.
It's diverse, eccentric, funny, clever women.
There's a little bit of rebelliousness in there. As the head porter, it's something that we're always watching out for, but secretly, I understand.
Kindness makes Newnham.
Listening.
Solidarity makes Newnham.
I want to say the porters.
Oh my God, beware high winds.
Make sure that you don't get blown away. Yeah.
Brunch makes Newnham.
And I'll always get the same thing, right?
Baked peas, hash browns, sausage, eggs, everything.
And then I take my little tray and I go and sit at the round table with like some of my friends and we just chat for like 2 hours until the buttery staff are like, please go out. I think it's just like a nice way to, at the end of the week, just relax and catch up with friends, because I feel like usually in hectic terms you don't get to do that often.
Early morning bicycle rides, me and Louise heading out to the boathouse. And here I am now presenting the boat race. 3 of them in this year's Blue Boat were from Newnham College.
When I used to climb in when I was, coming back from a date or something late, I think it's 11 o'clock is curfew. You can't get in after that. And there was a place where I used to squeeze through sort of 2 bars that you could prize apart. But I've always been fat and I got stuck. And the boy I was with had to push me through. Push. And I did make it. I did get through.
The ease of friendship. There isn't any of the jostling around you can have at school, and there was no hierarchical stuff like you can get in jobs. You drifted in and out of each other's rooms. You talked at breakfast, but it was an uncompromised friendship.
I miss most about my time in Newnham was that wonderful sense in my 20s that the world was at my feet and absolutely anything was possible. And I don't think I can ever recapture that sense of infinite possibility again.
Permission to read and learn and the freedom that gives you to expand your mind.
Relative freedom that you feel you have. And once you leave that, it's kind of like a sense of security that you leave behind.
I think it is this mixture of informality, support and cohesion.
It'll be only 3 years, but it doesn't feel like 3 years. It feels like sort of 9 years each term is almost like a year.
Drinking your time there, savour every moment.
I really hope that Newnham keeps on being a progressive space.
Sometimes it relies so hard on its legacy of being one of the first women's colleges that it forgets that all the colleges take women now and it needs to continue moving. Yes, it was great for it then, but what does that mean if you're not trying to be pioneering now? You can't just rely on an old legacy when it's 150 years ago.
They should let trans students self-identify.
To keep on producing smart, independently minded women who are determined to improve their world.
To remain true to its progressive and feminist origins.
In the next 150 years, I want it to keep pushing boundaries.
Of encouraging young women to have confidence to challenge and to dare to do different.
Retain and protect its sense of independence and its pioneering spirit, but expand to spread that to more young women across the world and older women, frankly.
You've got to give the young people a chance to run the show. You don't want people in their 70s and 80s making decisions. You know, I'll help out, I'll give advice if I'm asked, but otherwise you've got to move over and let someone else come and take charge. 150 years, maybe Newnham will say, well, okay, I think the battle for women's equality has been won and we don't need a women's college. Now, I'm not sure that that will be true. What I feel very strongly about at the moment is that the battle for women's equality hasn't been won. You know, if anybody tells me we don't need a women's college in Cambridge, I will tell them to piss off. You kind of hope that maybe the world will be such that you won't feel that, but I think it'll probably take 150 years.
So a big thank you to our students, Charlotte and Sushien, for their take on Newnham and what it means to us. It's a great start to this virtual festival of art, science and ideas to celebrate the 150 years since the founding of Newnham College. And I welcome you to this opening event from wherever you are in the world, or if you're watching later on Catch Up. I'm Alison Rose, I'm the current principal of Newnham, and I'm delighted to be joined by my three predecessors. Between us, we cover 30 years of the college principals, going back to 1992. Baroness O'Neill, Honora, you took up the baton in 1992. Tell us a bit about your journey to Newnham.
Well, I had a near miss when I was 17, which is to say that my school decided that two historians shouldn't compete with one another. So I was put in for Girton and she was put in for Newnham, and both of us went to Oxford. So there was my near miss. However, I didn't miss out on everything because Somerville Library was built by Basil Champneys, so I had a rather parallel experience.
That's amazing, I didn't know that. And what's keeping you busy now?
I've just finished a book on the ethics of digital communication, which has been preoccupying, difficult, and one can only, as it were, cover so much. But it's interesting, and the ethics is usually done in a very, what shall I say, slapdash way.
And when is that going to be published?
I had an email from CUP this morning, but I haven't actually read it yet.
Okay, well, that's something for us to look forward to. We'll have to get you back to talk about that when it's published. Dame Patricia, you took over in 2006, but your connection with Newnham goes back a lot further than that. Do you want to tell us about your story?
Yes, I had the wonderful privilege of reading history here. When I was 17, I'd never met anybody who'd been to university, let alone Oxbridge. And I'd gone to a school which was an early embracer of the comprehensive movement, and it was terribly keen on equality, and it immediately banned any exam results or anything like that. So the only flipping thing I was any good at, I was told to be ashamed of. And so, of course, I formed this view that you certainly didn't go to university, and that was, that was for other people. And then a new history teacher came in the lower sixth form, and she said, "You, Oxbridge." And I said, "Absolutely not, and you had to stay on another year in those days." She said, "Well, I shall teach you in the lunch breaks." And she did. And Of course, I got to Newnham and it was perfectly normal and everybody was welcoming and my life changed.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. As we'll probably talk about later on, there are a lot of first generation people at Newnham, I think. And tell us a bit about what you're working on now.
Well, my background, of course, is in media and communications, BBC, Ofcom, and so on. And the modern version of that, as Nora was just saying, is digital comms and AI. And I have been working on the ethics of AI with not much success because, not for quotation, all those who are listening, the government's not very good at this stuff. So I look forward to Nora's book with enormous anticipation, but I'm still on the AI Council. I'm on the UKRI, the investment body for academia. But what I've been doing in the last year is chairing a cross-party commission for policy exchange on reform of government. And of course, all of us with our experience of what went wrong as well as what went right with COVID know that there is a lot of reform to be had. So that was most entertaining.
Yes, gosh, you've been very busy. And Dame Carol, you were principal, my immediate predecessor, from 2012 to 2019. What attracted you to Newnham?
Women. I felt very strongly about women being able to be the best they could be for themselves. And my own profession, which was medicine, when I went into it, there were very few women able to really move through it and go a long way. I mean, we usually were assistants to consultants. We weren't consultants. We didn't have the same sense of confidence or resilience. And I just thought it was wonderful to have a place that concentrated on allowing women to be the best they could be. So it was really that, above all, that really attracted me to it, the potential for development.
Yes, and you did a huge amount to that, as I can testify. And what's keeping you busy now?
I was going to say drugs, but I should put it probably slightly more carefully than that. The last 2 years, I've been doing an independent review for the government on first the supply and demand for drugs, which was part one, and then very recently treatment, prevention and recovery, and that was published this week. That's kept me very busy. I'm kept extremely busy by chairing the Centre for Ageing Better, which is a government what works centre, really interested in how we can enable us as we go through our lives to really be the best we can be as we approach older age, whether it's where we live, our health, if we wish to work, and to participate in communities. So that is really interesting. And then, of course, I have the British Library, which I chair, which is something so different, so wonderful for somebody who was born in a house with one book, the Bible.
Yes, a huge range of interests, and it's extraordinary. I'm sure we'll pick up on your reflections on that as we go through the conversation. So continuing, we'll be looking forward later on, but continuing sort of looking back, because this is 150th anniversary. Patricia, we've established that you were the first of us to arrive at Newnham in this, I think in the late 1960s as a student. What surprised you most about Newnham when you arrived?
Well, just because it was normal and friendly. But picking up from what Carol was saying, I do remember the university as a whole going to a lecture by Professor Ullmann, medieval history, and he would begin every week, gentlemen, and then he'd look at me, madam. It just shows you what's changed over the years. But I think my most abiding memory was probably the very first one, because I mentioned how terrified I was of Oxbridge, and I also had an interview at Oxford. And I arrived about 11 o'clock in the morning, was asked to sit in a corridor and wait. And I waited in that corridor. Nobody came to talk to me. Nobody fed me until it was dark. And then I was taken into the interview. And two, what looked to me like old women, were sitting on either side of the fire. And one of them started the interview by saying, And what led you to say such a stupid thing in this particular part of your entry exam? And of course, I crawled out of this interview. And as I went past the Porter's Lodge, the porter said, "Your mother has rung, don't go home, go to Cambridge." And I interviewed, I got on the train. When I got to Newnham, talk about different, the sheepdogs that candidates still encounter, took me to a room, toasted tea cakes for me, looked after me. Next morning, I'm ushered into Catherine Hughes' room. Lovely log fire, sunshine streaming through the windows, Labrador sleeping in front of her. Welcome, an exhibition to Cambridge, rejected by Oxford. So, Newnham gave me my chance in life, and the lights came on.
Well, that's brilliant. I know it's something we try and do in interviews, is just really make sure that we're putting people at their ease so that they can give it their best. And interestingly, as you probably know, all the interviews last year were online, and they will be again this year. But we still had the sheepdogs.
Did you?
Yes, digital sheepdogs, because they, obviously, as we know from getting set up for this, getting yourself logged into a machine, finding a quiet place, making sure they know what to do if their signal drops out, just getting them used to talking online, all that sort of putting people at their ease, you still need to do digitally. So we've had digital sheepdogs this year. For this academic year, we will for next academic year. Yes, well, I think my fondest memory and my surprise is sort of linked. I was in Peel Hall, and in those days I had the most enormous kitchen with these huge ovens on the ground floor. It's now a laundry. And I remember one of my friends teaching me to cook spaghetti bolognese. Now, I came from Midlands, I was first generation. The only thing we knew of spaghetti was hoops in tomato sauce from a tin. So to actually cook proper spaghetti. And my friend had been taught it by somebody else on the languages course. So there was this sort of thread of Newnham passing on knowledge, not just in the sort of intellectual sense, but in the practical sense. So that's one of my memories. And it's interesting, we've been running a little thread on Facebook about Newnham and food, and some of the stories, particularly the older students. Treacle and cheese on biscuits seems.
I remember it well.
Is that right? Right.
Sunday evening.
Right. So it's not something we serve up particularly now, but it's clearly a strong memory for a lot of people. So Honora, you first arrived at Newnham as principal. What surprised you most about Newnham?
It sounds strange, but that I wasn't particularly surprised. I had by then, of course, knocked around the university world, both in the UK and in the US, quite a lot. I'd even not begun to knock around other parts of life, and it seemed enormously welcoming. I remember talking to Hugh Mellor in the Faculty of Philosophy soon after I arrived. He said, "Look, let's make the following arrangement. You teach as you want, but we don't ask you to do any admin because the college will give you enough of that, and so will the university." And so it transpired. So I never did any admin for the faculty. It was wonderful having my faculty across the road. I taught all the way through and enjoyed it.
What's your fondest memory?
It's so hard. I was probably a superannuated principal by the time I left. And I'd done 14 years, and to pick one memory is very, very hard. I tried to think of one, but there's so many good memories. And I think the following comes to mind. A girl who had a room in the top of Old Hall, and she said to me, "Oh, Principal, I spend a lot of time looking into your garden with my field glasses." And I've seen all 3 woodpeckers. I thought it was a wonderfully artless comment, and I too enjoyed the woodpeckers enormously, and I'm sure that you have too living in the lodge. I hope they're still flourishing.
I've certainly seen one of them. I'm not sure I'm sufficiently of an ornithologist to recognise all of them, so I'll have to get my bird book out. But yes, I've certainly seen
green, greater and lesser spotted is what you need to look for.
Yes. And certainly we have baby foxes and the little deer and
the muntjac, yes.
The muntjac. I haven't seen the badgers, but there's plenty of evidence of the badgers from all the.
The grass damage.
Yes,
the grass damage.
Yeah. So, Carol, what about you? What surprised you when you came to Newnham?
Well, in a way, rather like, I was really bowled over by the kindness, particularly of some of the fellas who, and ill-educated in the terms of how people live and work in Cambridge. I am not an Oxbridge graduate, and that was quite wonderful. And I compared it to what you would get if you were going into a new hospital, or the comparison with my own profession. But the other thing, which I'm sure most people would say to you, when you walk down Sidgwick Avenue, you have no idea of the sheer beauty and glory of what's inside, and the way the gardens and the buildings flow into each other. I mean, that is just such a jewel. And I think, my early, of course, when I was just going up to see the college, I hadn't quite appreciated that sheer wonder.
And any favourite memories that stand out for you?
Yes. Again, even though I wasn't there anywhere near as long as Nora, it's really difficult. But just to give you two, the real pleasure of seeing my first lot of students graduate, the ones that I'd admitted. And then I took them to their graduation. The second one, which is that lovely brief period in the college when the irises bloom, and all the work that Jenny Morton and the Gardeners did, that glorious period. And then my final favourite memory is when the rowing club took me out on the river to see if I could row.
And from the fact you're still with us, I assume you didn't sink. So.
Well, I think they realised I was never going to make a row, but it was a glorious day. And I did get to feel what it was like to row. And they were very tolerant and patient with me.
Yeah. Oh, that's a lovely, lovely memory. But obviously running colleges, these sort of positions have their challenges as well. And I think people are often very interested in those and what we sort of learn and grow through them. I mean, it's pretty obvious what my biggest challenge has been so far, which is running college through COVID. I mean, we've all been touched by that in our various walks of life, but the sort of amount of planning and replanning that goes on in a college and university to try and get the balance right between, yes, of course, being COVID secure, but trying to give the students the best possible experience. I mean, you talked about graduation, Carol, and it was a great joy to me to do my first graduation last week, because we weren't able to do one at all at the end of my first year, but that took far more planning and organisation to get a COVID secure ceremony in the Senate House, to get COVID secure viewing in the college, but so worth it when you saw the students and just their joy, because they've achieved so much, keeping studying and doing very, very well through COVID. And it's been such a team effort. I think that's how we're getting through the challenge. Everybody from, the catering staff who came in on Christmas Day to cook a Christmas lunch for those students who couldn't get home, because we had quite a few people couldn't get back, or if they would have had to do so much quarantine. So the tutors talking to students about where were they better at home, were they better in college, how are we going to work that out. The cleaning staff, I mean, I think all organisations have valued that. And then the academic staff, I mean, I take my hat off to them, the way they've had to adapt to teaching online, which is a totally different way of teaching, lecturing online, examining online, just a huge amount of change in a very, very short time scale. And everybody obviously working under the pressure of fear of being sick themselves, of having family members sick or dying. It's not a challenge that's over yet, but I'm hugely proud with how everybody's pulled together. And the students as well, the welfare, they've put all their welfare online, they've been tremendously innovative with all the things they've done there. So I think, as ever with these things, teamwork and communication have been and continue to be vital, and will continue to be so, because we're not out of the woods with this yet. So that, I think, is obviously my major challenge. Patricia, what challenges did Newnham face during your time as principal?
Well, a couple that were particular. One was the financial crash in 2008. And at the beginning of that year, I brought a couple of new members onto the investment committee. And one of them said, look, that the entire fund is over 90% in equities, and this is really a bit exposed. And we need to rebalance it by March. And you know what the bureaucracy of a college is like, and there were people who thought this and people who thought that. And we got to March, and my advisor, who I knew quite well, had been an ex-colleague, and I trusted him. And he said, you really, really, really got to rebalance it by June. And we got to early June, and he said, if you've not rebalanced it within 3 weeks, I'm going to resign. And at that point, I took, and you will know, my colleagues will all know how difficult this is. I took the only example of my issuing an instruction as principal, and we rebalanced the portfolio, and 3 days later the market collapsed. So that was no credit to me, but it was a hairy period. I think a lot of people will understand this. Nora had said to me in her handover, and I must remind Nora that handover consisted of her cooking me an omelette in the kitchen in the lodge, and then we walked under a full moon in the garden with glasses of whiskey while she advised me. And one of the things she told me was, there has been a build-up of disagreement about whether we remain a women's college, and I'm afraid you are going to have to address this. So I first of all talked to the Oxford colleges who had recently gone mixed, and they said it's a really difficult issue. You won't manage to have it debated without fellows resigning, and it will knock the profile of the college for ages when you have it and all that. So I got the idea that instead of having it in the governing body, where obviously decisions are made and therefore it would have been really, really head to head, we would have evening suppers in the lodge that were 3-line whips for the governing body, but informal. And we did this for 18 months. And then I would, in between, I would go around and test opinion. And over those 18 months, it was absolutely unmoving. 1/3 for going mixed, 1/3 absolutely against it and would resign. And the undecided who didn't move. And of course, it was 2/3 majority. And so the college, in its sensible, collaborative, debating way, decided not to make a decision, and nobody fell out with anybody. It was absolutely very Newnham, that.
Well, I think you're doing yourself a discredit as well, Patricia, because it's still spoken of among the fellows as an absolutely wonderful way of helping the college. Yes, as a self-governing fellowship, of really helping people listen to each other and work it through. So yes, it's a model. So that is still remembered. And thank you very much for all you did on the endowment. I mean, I think Cambridge Oxford endowments are often badly misunderstood. They're there to enable us to support the model of extra support for students, the rent bursaries, the hardship funds, everything we do. And certainly, I mean, we've lost to date 3.5 million through COVID, and the fact that we've got a good endowment that's continued to grow because of decisions taken under Carol's and because of the generosity of our alumni, we've been able to so far weather the COVID storm with no redundancies, no drop off in the amount of rent bursaries or whatever we're able to provide. So thank you for weathering those two challenges very well. And Nora, what about you? What would you highlight as the most challenging time during your principalship?
It's going to be very down to earth. Buildings were very challenging in my time. That is to say, we had so many buildings that were problematic. If you think about it, during my years, we rescued the old labs. We built Rosalind Franklin. We built the new library, we built the new kitchens and buttery, and we did the maint. And I think what I came out of feeling was that the Champneys built to a very high standard. They are wonderful buildings. They're expensive to maintain, but they don't need it very much. And most of the things that had to be done that were expensive had happened in the meanwhile. For example, if the students are to have fires in their bedrooms, you put an asbestos pad behind the fire. So every single student room had an asbestos infill. But probably the highlight of my asbestos experiences was when we decided that we would rescue the old labs, and they found what I believe is highly toxic, Carol will know, blue asbestos in the old labs. I remember standing in the garden watching chaps in hazmat suits remove the blue asbestos from a distance. So buildings were an enormous part of it, and I had had no previous exposure to buildings. What is wonderful is to see that Strachey has gone. Strachey was my nightmare all the way through. It was relatively new when Patricia was undergraduate, but the water was kept in the pipes, as you probably all know, only because, although they were steel pipes, they had been copper coated. Each time they got a nick, they leaked. However, the calcium in the Cambridge water supply built up some protection from inside the pipes. It was a very close thing.
Yes, well, buildings, I think, as you say, the Champneys buildings are lovely. And we're doing some big refurbishment projects at the moment. We did Old Hall last summer, and Peel, the first and ground floor of Peel are shielded off at the moment because we're doing that up at the moment. So it's an ongoing labour of love, I think. Carol, what about you? What was the major challenge you faced, do you think?
Well, I think one was a very personal one, which was the hugely untimely and sudden death of Catherine Seville. And I remember that so acutely because Catherine had been at lunch on the Tuesday, and when nobody could contact her, neither by email or by telephone, of course, we raised the alarm. And that night, we had the annual law dinner. And I sent a fellow and a member of staff out to Catherine's house. And we still didn't know what had happened. And of course, they couldn't get in. I then got some further help, but I must say the police took so long to get there. But actually, they told me half an hour before I went to preside at dinner that Catherine was dead. And I had to go to that dinner and pretend all was well. I wasn't going to announce it at the dinner. And then the fallout of that, I really realised just what a strength and power she'd been to college. It took a long time for that to work through, and it affected a huge number of people and a huge number of activities. I suppose the good thing that came out of that for me was that I did get to know her father very well, and I've kept a relationship with Adrian and Miriam, but I found that really an awful period. The other challenge, but of course I think it was a good challenge in Newnham, was taking down Strachey in its place. And of course, we didn't intend to do that in the beginning, but I'm so pleased we did do it. We wanted to build at the end of the playing field. Fortunately, Cambridge Council stopped all that because we thought we'll build there, then we'll knock down Strachey. But in fact, we ended up knocking down Strachey. And I think creating a building that looks to the future. So I was challenging throughout 4.5 years of the time I had at Newnham. But I'm longing to come back into the Iris Cafe.
Yes. And in fact, the Iris Cafe has been a real strength throughout COVID, because we couldn't always serve coffee in it, but it was a wonderful space for students to come in and study in throughout COVID and get them out of their rooms to a COVID secure environment. So it's just been a real joy. For me, there are a number of buildings that are at the heart of the college. The college hall is one, the library is one, but actually the cafe, I think, has become one such as well, because it's such a lovely light and such a real communal, outward-looking space. So, I mean, obviously, one of the privileges of being part of a Cambridge college is being part of this collegiate university, which is devoted to world-class research and education. Nora, what do you remember of Newnham's particular contribution to education and research during your time?
It's hard to think of a particular contribution. Every college has its own profile and is contributing slightly different things at different times. And Newnham has made a full contribution. Obviously, at any given moment, the fellowship is better represented in some faculties than in others. But the Cambridge system, which I of course realised over the mixing issues, was legally quite different from the Oxford position. That made a huge difference. Cambridge is very, very flexible, and I think it's a great strength. And we never had the slightest difficulty in ensuring that the right horses were for the right courses and helping colleges that had a gap in their man and woman path or whatever it was. It worked remarkably well. I wouldn't say it is the most efficient system. There are universities in this world that are much more centralized and top-down, but Cambridge works in a distinctive and, I think, effective way.
Yes. And Patricia, any particular thoughts about Newnham's contribution to that world?
Well, of course, there was just so much, and it's invidious to pick out any. So with due tribute to everything that has been going on, I was tremendously pleased about Newnham's strength in Anglo-Saxon, which is one of my interests. And I don't know how many people watching know the story of Jenny Morton's research into Huntington's, which is just absolutely marvelous. And if it's possible for the website to have any of the videos that she has shown, we really ought to have them. But the story, as I'm sure you all know, is that she was thinking about how she pursued this research. She needed animals with biggish brains. And of course, all the constraints around primates. And she's driving home one day, and in front of her is a truck full of sheep going to the abattoir. And she pulls out in front, stops the truck and says, "Can I buy your sheep?" And the videos are absolutely amazing. You may think that sheep behave like sheep. They don't. They behave like that because they're bored. And when you give sheep something to do, they become quite intelligent and interested. And Jenny's got this marvelous video of the sheep greeting her like a puppy dog might, doing the little exercises that she set up for them, you know, if they picked the right color bucket, then the food appeared. And there's one where she sees what they would do if she pulls a trick and puts the food in the wrong color bucket. You've ever seen a sheep look round and more or less say, "Now what's your game then?" Just magnificent. And of course, now she's got thousands of sheep in where she comes from in New Zealand, and huge program of research in this desperate area that needs it.
That's a wonderful story. I hadn't heard that one before. What I have heard is a conversation between her and one of our associate fellows, who's a horse vet, about the relative intelligence of horses and sheep, and even the horse vet conceding very quickly that sheep were much more intelligent. So as you say, they're a slightly underrated animal. But yes, so it's wonderful research that she's doing. Carol, any thoughts from you about Newnham's particular contribution?
Well, as Patricia and Honora said, it is really very difficult, and it's invidious to pick out individual bits. But I suppose because of my background, I was particularly interested in the science and the medicine research, and very keen that we should have whatever we needed to pursue mathematics and associated subjects. And I did take quite a time to try and push that along. But the other thing that, and I'll just use an example, was the ability of our younger fellows to work collaboratively with people in other specialties. So Roshan Owens, I linked up with Rebecca Fitzgerald. Rebecca Fitzgerald is in medicine, and I had mentioned Rebecca over many years. And Rebecca was developing a technique for detecting early esophageal cancer. It's called a cytosponge, and you put it down into the esophagus, and it gets covered with cells. And of course, you want to know what those cells are. Are they malignant? Are they going to become malignant? And she teamed up with Roshan, and Roshan has been using her much more chemical engineering skills to really work out the profiling of those cells. And it was a wonderful example of cross-specialty working that was actually happening in the college. They now share a PhD student who they both supervise. And I love to see that growth and sharing and using scientific knowledge in that way. So that's just one example. There was a lot of really good things going on that I was aware of, and I could have picked other examples.
And interestingly, we used Washeen's work for this year's Rosalind Franklin conference, which I think was something you started, Carol, which is encouraging young women to think of science careers and just that all the amazing interplay of disciplines in the science world these days. And I think that's one of the things that I would say that has been a great contribution of Newnham is to just widening access. I mean, obviously, right from the beginning, women who couldn't get to university, but also I speak to so many alumni who were here in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, who were first generation. And there's still that great passion for encouraging first generation students to Newnham. I get so many questions when I do alumni events. I really feel people are, holding me to account on that, which is great. And the fellowship too, the discussions we have at governing body on outreach and admissions are always the most keenly discussed, and people really wanting to know what we're doing. And the students do a great deal. I'm delighted that Zainab Ahmed, who has done a great deal for outreach. There's a video on our website. She's just graduated, but she's going to be the Cambridge Student Union sabbatical officer for Access. So she's taking the skills she's learned as a student ambassador to really go and sort of champion that and get people from widening participation groups to think about Cambridge and to think about Newnham. And as I said earlier, we're supported in that by the fact that we are generous college in terms of rent bursaries and just making sure that money isn't a reason for people not to come to Cambridge. So I'm also very excited that we're one of the 11 colleges who are going to pilot this foundation year that we'll be recruiting to for the first time in this next admissions round, which again is aiming to target people who, because of educational or family or school disadvantage, have got the potential but haven't got the grades, so they'll do the foundation year. So that's a really exciting development, I think, and just in line with Newnham's sort of tradition of widening participation. So we spent quite a bit of time sort of looking backwards and drawing on our experience as students, some of us, and principals. So let's try looking forward a little bit for the next, perhaps 150 years is a bit of a stretch, but perhaps the next 50 years. And let's start by sort of looking at the wider context for British universities and the challenges for British universities in the next 50 years. Nora, do you want to kick us off on that?
There are so many challenges, aren't there? I think one of the challenges is, curiously enough, not, or perhaps evidently enough, not in the universities. It is that we have been, as a country, rather negligent about technical education and the formation that people need. And I suspect a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have a very rigid timetable. We have a view that people should make certain steps in a certain sequence by a certain age, and then, hey presto, they've finished. We, I think, should think hard about giving people a bit more time to grow up, to yes, do their studying, but also do some other things, and to make much better informed decisions about what sort of step they want to take next. And that means getting away from the idea that there's only one prestigious route.
Yes, well, that's a good thought. You start earlier than the university, and the challenges start earlier than that. Patricia, what do you think?
I think that's absolutely right. And I would add, remaining world class in an increasingly competitive world, we have to lift our sights globally and make sure we're recruiting and matching world standards. And I'd like to pick up what the last thing you said about diversity and inclusion. The challenge of combining that with no compromise on merit is a very difficult one.
Yes.
And some of the work I've been doing in the past year about the civil service, you see lazy approaches to it. You know, you see quotas, you see CVs with education and qualifications left off in case education and qualifications are discriminatory. And yet we must find a way of valuing inclusion and diversity and merit and achieving both. And it's really, really difficult. I think the thing you said about a foundation year is very important. I think what universities can do with training courses and that sort of outreach initiative, investments in schools that bring youngsters that wouldn't have thought of Oxbridge, make it real for them. All those are tremendously important, because if you look at the profile of British universities now in the world, it is astonishing. But we can't just rest on our laurels if we are going to maintain it, and maintain it we must.
Yes, no, I think that's a very good point. In one of my past lives, I was involved in regional development, and universities are seen as so key. Obviously, education is so worthwhile in its own right, but they're seen as engines of economic growth too. So every country is investing in its universities and trying to attract capital, investment, and talent. So you can never afford to be complacent, even if your name is Cambridge University. Absolutely, yes. Carol, what do you think about the challenges for British universities in the next 50 years?
Well, I think one that's been growing louder and louder, and I think perhaps the pandemic has moved it even further up the agenda, is mental health and well-being and resilience. I think whichever university you look at, they're challenged in various ways by this. What is the best way to help students? What is the relationship between the health of the student and the academic staff and the non-academic staff, because they're not in absolutely isolated silos. Universities have quite rightly been worried by suicides, and that's difficult for people to handle. And just with the work I've been doing on illicit drugs, the biggest increase in the consumption of powder cocaine is in the 19 to 24-year-olds, which obviously means that does include students, and cannabis has also, of course, increased greatly in its consumption. So how do we best support the mental health in a positive way? You don't always want to have to be going in with secondary and tertiary prevention. You want to be in there enabling people to be mentally healthy and well and resilient, and to enjoy their time at university. So I think that is a huge challenge. The other one, I sense that there is a growing challenge between the value of online teaching and small group. And of course, that will be more relevant in the discussions in Cambridge and Oxford that some universities, but I find it hard to think that you can really be a university if all you do is teach online and have your lectures online. It seems to me it has to be in part about people meeting, people relationships. And I think that it is this struggle for more students and the development of online programs, the harnessing of technology. I think there is quite a lot to work through there for universities as we go forward. And will the effect of the pandemic, is it going to affect curricular design or the development of the curriculum? I'm not close enough to know, but they would be just some things I would throw in the mix.
Yes, I mean, online learning is a really interesting one, as you suggest, because of the pandemic. My personal view, and obviously, as I said, we're not out of the pandemic yet, is that it has actually validated the residential mode of universities, because what students and academics have really missed is that buzz you get of being in the same room, of conversations, those happenstance conversations, which you don't have those conversations around the edges of meetings, or grab a coffee between lectures, or chat on the way to lectures in Zoom. It's all much more sort of formalized. So I think students have been desperate to get back and get that wider learning that you get from running the boat club, doing the coaching, taking part in drama, all those wider skills that you get. I think it has pushed Cambridge, if I'm honest, in some positive ways. I mean, I was quite horrified when I came back to discover that the 3-hour handwritten exam still seems to be the gold standard. Even though students were typing all year, suddenly you had to get your pen out. And so because all the exams went online, suddenly we had to find ways of anti-plagiarism software and more innovative open book exams that stretch over 24 hours, shorter exams, issuing exams and giving students a week to complete them, much more innovative ways of doing exams. And I think the academics have appreciated not having to decipher exams written under hand scripts under stress. And also, I think it's accelerated. I think there is a value in recording lectures, because students have found it really helpful to be able to play lectures back if there's something they haven't understood. It's a good way to revise. So I think it's shown some of the power of what the technology can add, but also what you lose when you get you lose the residential. I'm sure I've had the experience of meeting people who I've only met online, and they are so different in real life than they are online. It's a totally different experience. And I think there's much less. I said to my students early on that I thought those of them who are used to spontaneity would find the virtual world much more difficult, because you have to book everything a lot more, I think. So I agree with you, Carol. And the mental health too. I mean, you did a lot on that, and trying to pick up on that too. Both the preventative, can we do different things around course design? Can we train students in things you do? I mean, COVID has taught us a lot on that, hasn't it? There's a lot of basic things about eating, drinking, exercising, sleeping, contact with people. You've got to learn to structure your days and not just work all the while. And then we've got to have the right therapies in place. One of the things that's really struck me is the high percentage of people who do go for counselling each year, and then also the high proportion of students with disabilities, many of which are associated with mental health and therefore need the support of the Disability Resources Centre. And all the evidence is that that's going to grow, not decrease. So I think you're absolutely right to pick those up, Carol. So I mean, if we perhaps turn particularly to Newnham's focus, women's education, women in higher education and research, are there any particular issues that you think women's education, women in higher education and research face going forward? Carol, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think still, and I regret to have to say this, I sort of I'd hope that by now women would feel they could progress all the way through up to whatever they want to become, say, a professor in a department. But I still hear and indeed talk to many women who they do very well up to their first postdoctoral position, And then it can be quite difficult, particularly actually in the sciences, I must say, to progress on in a way that would take you along with your male colleagues right to the top. And I still ask myself, what is it that we have to do to enable these women to feel confident? A Cambridge academic who is really a very capable young woman said to me only last week, they would like me to take on becoming head of the department, but Carol, I'm too afraid. I'm afraid I can't do it. Now, I mean, I really feel she could do it, but it's that feeling, what have we not got in place that would perhaps help later on in that career? I mean, I know the university had special grants for women scientists coming back so that they could get someone to help them in the lab while they started up their experiments, rewriting, they've got to get their next grant. But too many women researchers end up on rather short-term contracts. And then they're juggling, perhaps bringing up a family, childcare, which we know isn't all that great in Cambridge. So I think there are still things there. When you look at the figures, I don't know, Alison, whether in the last 3 years those figures have got any better than when I last looked at the university figures for women moving through the ranks, but they were not what I would want them to be.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And even in faculties where there's a lot of women lecturers, very often the professors are still predominantly male.
And of course, you have to put yourself forward, don't you, in the Cambridge system for promotion. And the number of, when I was principal, the number of people who said to me, well, I don't really know whether I should be putting myself forward. Most men don't ask themselves that question.
No, I was at a very good discussion of some of the female professors in medicine in Cambridge, and they were all, somebody said, hands up, anyone around this table who's never suffered imposter syndrome. And I'm sure you can imagine how many hands went up. None. Now, it's not to say that some men don't suffer from imposter syndrome too, but I think it does still seem to be, and it's something I talk about quite a bit to the students, because I think they think by the time we get to our exalted level, you just float on a cloud, whereas reminding them that imposter syndrome is very much alive and well, I think, as you go up the different stages. I had a wonderful conversation with the principal of, the Master of Jesus College, Sunita Elaine, about this, and she looked at me and she said, Alison, I say to people, if you've never suffered imposter syndrome, it's because you've not stretched yourself enough. So trying to flip that to say, no, this is actually a positive, rather than thinking, oh, I feel such a failure, I don't think I'll show myself up. Rather, no, right, this is a sign that I'm stretching myself. So this is, let's flip this, let's take this, let's understand that a lot of this is what adrenaline does to our bodies when we're doing something that's challenging, and it's not, and to sort of push on through it. Terry Apter, who was senior tutor when you were here, Carol, has done some research on that, and she feels that women are getting a bit better at pushing through imposter syndrome. I think obviously that's her research. I still think there's a way to go, but there's also, I think she feels there is an expectation problem, and that may play into what you're saying, that people don't expect as much of themselves, or the people around them don't expect, particularly when people start to have families. Other people make assumptions about what people will or won't want to do, and which is, and therefore that's a barrier that women have got to push through.
Just one other thought. I mean, I always try to say to women, you don't have to go straight up the ladder. You can go up a tree that's got branches. So it doesn't have to be straight up. You can go out and explore and come back. And, I went into medicine nearly 8 years after everyone else. And people said, you're too old to go into medicine, Carol. And said, well, I'm going to be 8 years older anyway, so I might as well do something I'd like to do, really do. So it's that feeling that it doesn't all have to be on that silly straight ladder. You ought to be able to go out and explore, come back and make some mistakes, for goodness sake. And I think people feel they haven't got time to make mistakes, well, we're living quite a long time. We have got time for mistakes.
Possibly people need to think again about a world in which people apply for new posts incessantly. So it's year after year after year, because at the postdoc stage, so many of the posts are so short. And that doesn't allow people the breathing room to reflect on where they're trying to head.
Oh, I agree, Honora.
Yes, I mean, we advertised one of our junior research fellowship posts in the Humanities this year, and we had 320 applications for one post.
Yes, that's about double what it was when I was there.
Yeah, so it's really tough getting into to that step. And I would say, I mean, for me, one of the Cambridge has still got more to do on widening participation at undergraduate level, but it's postgraduate level where there's even much more to do. I mean, certainly in my day, it was usually possible to go straight from an undergraduate course to a doctoral course, but these days most people do a master's course first. So just the expense of the master's course and getting funding for that and the doctorate, and if you're not getting people through, people from widening participation backgrounds, women of colour, women from diverse backgrounds, if they're not getting onto that ladder, then you're not going to have a very diverse lectureship. So I think actually it even starts at that postgraduate level, and then it gets even more difficult. So I do think that's a particular challenge for women. Honora, did you want to add anything else about issues faced by women in research and humanities?
I think women do jolly well in research in the humanities. It's probably the field in which the obstacles disappeared first. My worry about the humanities is much more about the downward pressure on the necessary skills. For example, the extraordinary decline in the number of pupils, particularly men, who don't take even one foreign language, even up to age 16. And in a world in which you've got a huge cohort who, because on the whole, because they were required to do 3 STEM, which I don't disagree with, did 0 NFL. And I think we need, if we are to help the humanities, to think a bit more about the skill set that is relevant. Yes. And that's not really a gender point, it's a quite general point.
Yes, I mean, my subject at college was history, but I studied languages during my time as a diplomat. Just the sheer joy and the insights into cultures it gives you if you can communicate in a language that is not your own, and the fact that that's sort of just being lost really to so many because it's seen as a specialist interest rather than a core part of a journalist.
Well, we have probably one of the best champions of studying modern foreign languages in Jean Cousins. Very active. I go to her meetings and learn a lot.
Yes, no, it's a really important subject to champion. Patricia, anything you wanted to add on challenges, particular issues, women's education and women in higher education and research?
Well, it's been a good discussion, so not particularly in education, but perhaps add a comment about those women who don't go on academically, but go out into business or public service. And of course, everything that you've all said, Carol, especially about self-confidence and resilience, is absolutely key. And women in particular must bring skills. They still have to be better than the men, and they should just realize that they have to be better than the men. When I was chair of Ofcom, I would do occasional lunches for any of the youngsters who wanted to come and talk about, how do they make decisions and role models, and how do they balance their home life and all that. And they were falling into the trap that is set by too much of the debate about gender equality, which was, well, it's all so difficult, so I need help. So I'll go and ask for this and this special favor, and I always need to leave at 4:30. And I'm afraid I said to them, that isn't going to be the way that you're going to make your mark, because we have to be liked and respected by our colleagues, and we have to be thought to be serious. So it is tougher for us, but we've got to take it on the chin and show that we can do it. And what was so interesting was when somebody said that to them and they no longer felt like victims, you saw them sort of brace up. And it did something for, you know, I'm not on my own in this. It's like it for every woman. And actually it's hard and I can do it. And so I think there's some traps in the, oh dear, we'll find quotas to help you, because it damps down people's ambitions for themselves.
Yes, and if it damps down people's confidence in their ability to do things, that's yes. I think
yes,
perhaps it's still a go on, Nora.
I just want to say, if you look at the national statistics on where we are failing most people educationally, it is unfortunately poor boys, including poor white boys. And I think the idea that we are addressing cohorts of girls and women dealing with the most disadvantaged group is completely fallacious.
No, right. No, you're quite right.
Yes, it's patronising, isn't it, to say that we can't do something about this and that we accept, you know, special cases. No, we believe in, whether it's poor white boys or women or whatever, we believe in them. We will find ways to help them and bring them through.
Yeah. It's seeing the potential and the benefits that come to us all from the diverse contribution that having people from very different backgrounds can give, and seeing that as a strength, as you say. Yes. So we're coming towards the end of our time in this opening session. Perhaps just quickly, any particular things that you think challenges and opportunities Newnham will face in the next 50 years? I'll kick off with mine, which is climate change. How do we get out of gas? How do we insulate our wonderful old buildings without damaging them? And how do we really become more carbon neutral and play our part in Cambridge's goal of becoming carbon neutral? So that's, I think, one of the challenges, and an opportunity as well, actually. Some of the things we've been able to do with conferencing, video conferencing, I think we will take forward from the COVID. We've got much better at virtual conferencing. We've now got to get better at blended conferences, which is a whole new ball game. Nora, any quick thoughts on challenges and opportunities for Newnham?
Well, a quick warning on blending. We have a hybrid House of Lords, and I don't think it works entirely brilliantly. I think, yes, of course, the online interaction will continue and it will be wonderful, but we better think now about the costs that it will have as well. And I think the costs will not be borne by Cambridge, but will be borne by many academic institutions of less prestige and less resource, who will find that it's cheaper to buy in an online lecturer in X, whatever X may be, than to appoint somebody. So I think we're going to face some very major shocks from the online world in the university system. And I do think a lot about the system and not just about Cambridge.
I agree with you, Nora. I think that's a real risk.
Mm-hmm.
Patricia, anything you want to add?
I think academic freedom is going to be the big issue for the next few years. And of course, Newnham is so well placed because it's always had such an open, relaxed commitment to whatever views you have, to supporting whatever kind of person you are. And what worries me is beginning to see necessary and important debate shifting into censorship and cancelling. And of course, the next thing is the burning of the books. And the colleges can be very, very important bastions against bullying in that respect, because after all, what a university is about if not academic freedom?
Thank you. And then finally, we've all had to give those messages to freshers in those opening days, and we've all had to give those final speeches to our graduates as they leave us for the next stage in their career. So I thought I'd end by saying, what would your top message in your first speech to freshers be if you were giving it today? Carol?
Get to know each other. I think this is a fantastic opportunity when you come up to a place like Newnham and Cambridge, the breadth of people that you can meet from all around the world. I think this is about really forming your friendships, your networks. I wouldn't give them an academic message. I want them to really make the most of the people they will meet and broaden their horizons. That would be my message.
Wonderful. Patricia?
Do your best, go for the best, have fun.
I wouldn't disagree with any of that.
And Nora, well, I'm going to give you a different question, Nora. So what would be your top message to new graduates, so third years just before they graduate? What would be your top message to them if you were giving it today?
Enjoy the next stage, and if it doesn't work out, do something else.
Very good advice.
I would make it more flowery.
Yes, I think mine would be that the learning doesn't stop here. That whatever your age, just keep learning, keep that curious mind. That was what made me in the end decide I could apply to be an ambassador when the then Foreign Secretary said he looked for a curious mind in ambassadors. And I thought, oh yes, I think Newnham's given me that ability, that confidence in my ability to learn about new things. And in fact, that's one of the joys of meeting alumna is the amazing things that, as Carol has said, people start off doing one thing and then they do something completely different and then they do something else again, and it's just that confidence to keep doing something new and keep learning and keep discovering. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. I just want to say a huge thank you to you all for giving up your time and sharing so freely your memories, your experiences. It's given us a really good start to this virtual festival. To all those who are listening, do please sign up for lots of things in the rest of the weekend or get them on catch up in the next fortnight. We look forward to getting your feedback as we plan towards a real festival next year, but we're just so grateful for the technology that's enabled us to do this virtual festival at the end of Newnham's first 150 years. So Patricia, Anora, Carol, thank you so much, and goodbye everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, and thank you.
Yep.